you're in PyCharm. We're going to go through these looping problems. The problems themselves, we've got 4 of them plus a challenge, which I think we'll be able to get through the challenge as well. I'm going to do this with you. You're going to turn it in at the end. Got it? I want to make sure you're following along. So whatever we get to, you're going to submit at the end of the period. Sound good? All right. So problem 1, we're going to create a program that will print all the even numbers from 2 to any value we enter. So if I enter 24, it's going to print 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, all the way up to 24. If I enter 57, it's going to print 2, 4, 6, 8, all the way up to 56, because that's still less than 57. Problem 2, we're going to sum all the digits from 1 up to a given number. In problem 3, we're going to calculate a factorial. In problem 4, we're going to make this little design here where it has this triangle of stars. And we're going to enter in how many rows we want out of those stars. And then the challenge problem is a mathematical problem where we're going to enter a number, and it's going to tell us the sum of the digits of that number. So if I enter the number 243, it's going to add 2 plus 4 plus 3 and give me 9. Okay? So it's kind of an interesting little problem. So let's get into it. If you've got PyCharm open, find your Unit 2 folder, and we're just going to add a series of Python files to it, okay? So here's what we can do. You're going to right-click, New Python file. I would title this While Loop Practice A, okay? Because I believe these problems are titled A, B, C, D. Am I correct in that? I can't remember. No, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's call it While Loop Practice 1. I'm going to hit Enter, okay? And we'll just make one program per problem. Everybody cool with that? So this is problem 1. This is going to display evens from 2 to a number entered by the user. Okay. You guys see that in the back? Yeah? All right. So yesterday we discussed how you need 3 things for all of your loops. First and foremost, you need a control variable. 2, you need a condition. And 3, you need some sort of change or incrementation. Without those 3 things, you do not have a valid loop, so we need to come up with those 3 things, okay? In all of my problems. That doesn't mean those are the only 3 things that happen in the problem. That just means those are 3 must-haves, okay? So we're going to print the even numbers from 2 up to a number that the user enters, okay? Any number the user enters. So thoughts. What do we want to do first? Just spitball here. Shout something out, whatever it takes. What do we need to come up with? What variables are we going to need to keep track of? What are we thinking here? Okay? Yeah. Good. So we want an input for the number that they're going to count up to. I don't really care what we call this. We can call it value, okay, equals. And you remember how to get input from the user, especially if it's going to be integer. You go int input, enter a number to count up to, okay? Something like that. You have a prompt in there. So there's the first variable. That's going to tell us what we're counting up to. We're also going to need another variable to display or to hold all the numbers we're actually doing the counting with, right? I don't care what you call it. I think that's probably best to be called counter. But where should I initialize counter to? What value should I make it? Yeah, 2. It's the first number we're going to print, right? We're going to go from 2 up to whatever this value is, right? And include it if necessary. So we're going to start this at 2. Okay. Good. Yeah, so wherever you need to, right? So there's my control variable. It's time to now get into the loop, okay? This one's going to be a little different than what we practiced yesterday, because yesterday it was always like counters less than 10, or counters less than 50, or counters less than 100, or counters greater than 0. Here, we're going to have while counter is what, though? We want to print all the numbers from 2 up to, and possibly including, the value entered by the user. So what would this condition look like? Well, what? Again, this is new to you. Try something. What do you want to say here?
Hello.
Thanks. Thoughts? Joe? Counter is greater than or equal to what? 2? Okay. Let's think about what this is going to do for us, okay? So counter is technically 2, right? So right off the bat, this statement is true, which means we will get into our loop, yes? But in what way does it stop, okay? Counter is going to keep getting bigger, right? It's going to go from 2 to 4 to 4 to 6, 6 to 8, 8 to 10, right? Aren't all of those numbers greater than 2? So will this ever end? No. So this particular condition may not work, okay? What else might we say? Okay, let's try that. Value, okay? Now, think about what you're going to type in for value. You're going to type in a value like 12, right? Is 2 greater than or equal to 12? Yes or no? That's false. But I think we're a bit closer, okay? How can I reword this so that the counter and the value come out to a true statement initially and could eventually become false, knowing that the counter is going to keep getting bigger? What can I do with the inequality? Somebody said it. Less than, okay? Think about what you have here. You've got a counter, it's set to 2. That's going to be the smallest value you have in this entire set that you're going to print. You have value, that's going to come in as a number from the user. Hopefully they print like a 12 or an 18 or a 26 or something like that, right? The counter should be less than the value initially. It will continue to grow and eventually it will pass it. And then when it passes it, that's when we stop doing all of this, right? And what we're going to do when we get in here is we are simply going to print our counter. Okay. And then if you remember, I want to print just evens, right? So how do I go from 2 to the next even, which is 4, to the next even, which is 6, to the next even, which is 8? How do I get from 2 to 4, from 4 to 6, from 6 to 8, 8 to 10, so on and so forth? What do I have to do to counter each time? Say that one more time. I add 2. I increase it by 2. So we're going to say counter plus equals, that's increased by 2. And I have now all 3 of my parts. Here's my condition. Here is my incrementation. Okay, the change that we want to put in this. Okay, run it. See what happens. Does it work as you would expect? If I were to enter in a number like 10, does it print all the values from 2 to 10 evens? Sure does. If I were to enter a number like 13, does it print all the evens from 2 to 13? It sure does. Right? This seems to work pretty well as long as the number we pass in is positive. Okay? Doesn't work for negatives, but I don't want it to work for negatives. I don't want to count down. I want to just count up from 2 to whatever number I enter. So this is, exactly what we're looking for out of this, okay? You might have some value coming in via input. That's fine. You've got a counter. This is your control variable. This is where you're starting. You have a condition, okay? This is going to be the hardest part. You notice we messed it up twice before we got to this point. And that's fine. You're going to make mistakes, okay? If you were to do what we first said and say greater than 2, you're just going to notice your loop goes on forever, okay? Forever. So stop it, pause it, see what happens, and how can you change it. If we had this as a strict less or greater than, you would see that it would never run, okay? So stop, pause, reflect, see what's going on, and change it. And then hopefully eventually you're changing it to something like this. Always think about the values you have for these and see how can I make this true first and eventually become false. Okay? And this is the setup we want to get to. Y'all with me? All right. So there's the first problem. You'll be turning that in a little bit later, so you'll be uploading that to Google Classroom. Okay, so make sure you save it. Okay, if you're in PyCharm, it's already saved as soon as you run it. Every time you run a program in PyCharm, it saves it automatically, so you don't have to worry. Got it? Let's make a new one. Python file. We're going to call this problem 2. So we'll go while loop practice number 2. In this problem, we are asked to create a program that will sum all the integers from 1 up to any value entered by the user. So if they enter 10, it's going to add 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8 plus 9 plus 10, and it will give you the grand total of 55. Okay? If you did 1 to 100, it'll give out 5,050. Okay? Those are two values that I know off the top of my head that we can test this with. Okay? So let's get into it and see what we can do. This program is going to sum all the digits from 1 to a value entered by the user. Always a good idea to put that little heading on the top of your program so that you know what you're working with. Okay? All right. This one's a bit more complex, but it has similar features, okay, than what we've done before. I'm going to have to keep track of a few more variables here, or at least one more, okay? So, what are my variables going to be in this problem to make this work? What kind of information am I going to have to store and hold on to? Because if you don't have all the variables, you can't do the problem. What do you got? Give me one of the variables. Okay, so I'm just going to make, and you don't have to copy this down, just to make like declarations. We're going to need the value to count up to, right? What else are we going to need? So just like we had before, that input that came in as a value, that might be a 10, it might be 100, it might be 15, it might be 27. I don't know. What other kind of variables are we going to need? Yeah, what do you got? What's that? Okay. The actual value we're counting up by. And we'll give all these titles a little bit later. And we need one more variable that's different than the last problem. This was not in the last problem. What's this last variable going to store? What do you think? Read the description. What do you got? Say it again. Uh, no, we probably don't need that. I mean, unless we're thinking in two different ways, because that's going to be that incrementation where we just up it by 1 each time. What I think, Sinai?
Does it say the values we have together?
Well, be more specific. I think you're on the right path, but the value that we're counting is going to be what we're doing here, the value we're counting up by. But you're on to the right path. We want to store what? This one's tricky because we haven't done it yet. Okay? This is what we call an accumulator. Okay? The total. Anytime you see the word sum in a problem, that you're going to add things up, you got to think about an accumulator. Okay? Often we'll call this total. Okay? Those are the three things we're going to have in this problem as we work. So let's talk about actually making these things. The value that we're going to count up to, right? We need that to come in. That's going to come in via input just like it did before. So we're going to say something like value equals int input. And we might say enter a value to sum up to. Okay? That's pretty easy. That's the value we're coming in with. If I type in a 10, it's going to print out the sum of all the digits 1 to 10. Okay? If I type in 100, it's going to say, okay, give me the sum of all the digits 1 to 100. We are going to need that counter, right? I should start the counter at 1 because we want to go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 to 9 to 10 up to whatever that value is, right? This is going to be my control variable. And the last thing we need is that accumulator, which I'm going to call total. What would be a good value to start total at? Like, okay, if I started at 1, that means whatever value I have is going to be 1 plus that, right? And if I do 1 plus, that means I'm going to be 1 more than what I really want. So what's a good value to start an accumulator at? Anytime you're summing something, we want the additive identity. So you want to revise? 0. Anytime you're doing a sum problem, always start your accumulators at 0. Okay? Okay, this is my accumulator. Now, we have 3 variables. We're probably going to pick 2 of these variables to base our condition on. Which of the 2 are we going to work with? While what is true? What's moving and what's it starting to approach? That's the important part here. Okay. Go ahead, Sine. Okay, sure. Question.
So would the accumulator also be considered a variable?
The accumulator is a variable, yes.
We have like a counter that is a variable. So what would the name of the variable?
Of total?
Yeah.
The total is what I would call an accumulator. Okay, whereas the counter I would call the control variable. Value is just a variable. Okay, there isn't necessarily a specific name for every variable you're going to make, but in the context of this loop and the problem we're doing, I can give more specific names to these 2 variables at the very least. Okay, all right, now back to my question. What's the condition going to look like? What number keeps changing and what value is it approaching to? And how am I going to relate the 2? I don't want you to do this all by yourself. Mikey, what do you got? While counter is what? Greater than or equal to what? To 1? Is that what you said? I think that's what you said, right? Okay. It's not. I'm not mad with you being wrong. You know what I'm doing? I'm encouraged by your participation. Nobody else is even giving it a try. Okay? So let's just take a look at what we've got here. Is counter greater than or equal to 1? True, right? So this at least allows us to enter the loop, right? But the other question is, will it allow us to leave the loop? Not really, because counter is going to keep getting bigger, right? And any number bigger than 1 is greater than or equal to 1, right? So we can't necessarily control this to a 1. That doesn't make this end. It makes it start, so we got half the problem solved, but it won't allow it to end. So how else can I judge counter against something so that I can get into the loop, but also eventually force it to stop? I can go what? Less than what? Okay, we could try that. Now let's think about what we got written here. Counter is 1. Is 1 less than 1? Yes or no? No. So in our part, this problem won't even start. Let's get off the 1 kick. Aaron, what do you got? Less than what? I'm sorry, I'm really having a struggle now as they turn the air conditioner back on. Less than or equals to 1? Okay. I'm sorry. Is that what you said? Okay. Yes, this will allow it to start, right? But let's think about what's going to happen immediately as I shift counter from 1 to 2, right? Because that's how it's going to shift. It's going to go from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, right? As soon as I shift this to 2, 2 less than 1. Is that true or false? It's false. And so this isn't going to run very long now, is it? Let's get off the 1 kick, guys. This has nothing to do with the number 1. Has everything to do with something else here. We're judging it and running it up to a given number. Eric? Less than or equal to value. Let's take a look at that one. Okay. Now, remember, value is something we're going to enter. It's going to be a 10, it's going to be a 12, it's going to be a 100, right? Counter set to 1. Let's assume value is at 10. Just make the assumption. Is 1 less than 10? Yes. And when I make the adjustment from 1 to 2, is 2 less than 10? Yes. Is 3 less than 10? Yes. Is 4 less than 10? Yes. Eventually it'll become 9. Is 9 less than 10? Yes. Is 10 less than 10? Yes. And eventually it becomes 11. Is 11 yet less than 10? No. Right? So it will start and it will stop. And it'll stop at the right time. We wanted to make sure that it stops when it gets to value. So this is going to be what we start with. Okay? Now, what do we do while we're in here? We want to keep track of the sum of all the counters, right? Now, think about how you can talk about that in terms of total and counter. What do you want to do to total in terms of counter? And just speak plain English to me. Total needs to do what in terms of counter? Darius, you're saying something. Subtract. Now remember, it's going to get bigger. Sum is an addition problem, right? So when I think about this, I would say total needs to increase by counter, correct? Whatever value of counter is, total needs to increase by it, right? This is why I keep using those words. Increase by and decrease by. When you hear me say it, it makes sense in the context of the problem and it turns into Python very easily, right? What did the words increase by mean in Python? What symbol do I use for increase by every single time I say it? I use addition, but it's not just addition, it's always a plus equals, right? If I say increase by, you think plus equals. And when I say total is increased by counter, this is what I write. Total increase by counter, it means total plus equals counter. Every single time I say it, every single time you say it, we know that that's what it looks like in Python. This literally means total is increased by counter. Just like I would always say counter is increased by 1 in the next line. Right? This is me changing my control variable now. So I'm making that adjustment. And if I keep changing the counter up by 1, eventually it will exceed, get bigger than value, which will make this no longer true, and I will stop doing this. Notice I do not have a print statement anywhere in this loop, do I? But that's okay because it's doing the job it's supposed to do. When I'm done with the loop, I can print the total. Oops. And notice my print statement. The sum of 1 to whatever value we typed in is total. And those numbers will then get injected into that print statement very nicely and neatly. Go ahead and run it. Type in a value like 10. It should print 55. And it does. The sum of 1 to 10 is 55. Go ahead and run it again. Type in 100. It should print 1050, which it does. Or sorry, 5050, which it does. Okay. I have all of my parts. I have my control variable. I have my condition. I have my incrementation statement to my control variable. That one variable keeps changing all the way through. I'm doing some work in here, whatever that work may be. I'm handling it. I'm doing it quite effectively. Okay. And we're making it work for ourselves. Okay. I know this isn't easy by any means, and I'm not here to pretend that it is. Okay, I'm not trying to make it easy, but we got to keep trying different things. Okay, in that last example, I saw much more participation out of that. Keep that going. Are you with me on that? All right. Try another one. Keep it alive. This next one, I'm going to let you try it on your own. It's set up almost identically to the first one. Okay, to the second problem. Write a loop that will calculate a factorial. A factorial is the value of all the products of the digits from 1 up to and including that number. So 6 factorial is 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5 times 6. So you're not doing a sum, but you're doing a product. Got it? I want you to try to set it up the same way so that you type in a value and it will calculate its factorial. And if you type in 6, it should spit out 720. So let's make a new Python program. We'll call it while loop practice number 3. And go ahead and look at both problems at the same time. If you want, PyCharm gives you the ability to split your screen in half. Go ahead and right-click on one of these tabs and select move or split and move right. And what you'll be able to see are 2 different programs open at the same time if you're in PyCharm. Makes it quite convenient, okay? So that you can see what you want to see. And that way you can mimic one on the other side. You with me on that? Let's take a few minutes. Let's see what you can put together, okay? You're still going to have your value. You're still going to have your counter. You're still going to have your total. Your total is going to start in a different spot, though. You can't start at 0, can you? 0 times anything is always what? So where do you want to start?
1.
Bingo. Do it. All right? Write the loop. Let's see what you come up with. You're trying to make that further. So I'll give you a minute or two to try to put that together, and then we'll go over it. But do your best, see what you come up with. Your ability to practice is helpful here. Variables at the top, make your condition, make the changes you need to in your loop, bring it to your factorial. Ready to discuss? Where are we at? Avoiding eye contact at all costs, huh? All right, let's get into this a little bit. Regardless of where you're at, I'm sure you're making some headway. So, who wants to start us off? I need some variables. What would my variables be, and what are they going to hold? Fernando, what do we got at the top of your program? What kind of variables you got? Give me the first one. Okay. So some input. Okay. So we're going to have a value, and that's going to be input. And your prompt probably said something like enter a number to factorial. Okay. So always make sure your prompt is reading towards what we've got. Okay. I need another variable. What else do we got in this problem? Isaiah, what else did you have in here? Okay, we need a counter equal to 1. That is likely your control variable, right? That's going to be the variable that we keep changing. 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. We're going to go it all the way up to and including the value, right? And then I need one more for this. Who's got the last one? Joe. Now, why 1 this time? Right. If I make it 0, then the whole product is going to be 0, right? Because 0 times anything is 0. By making it 1 allows me to say 1 times 1 makes 1, and then 1 times 2 makes 2, and then 2 times 3 makes 6, and then 6 times 4 makes 24, and so on and so forth, right? So it starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So this is my accumulator that I'm going to use. Okay. I need a condition. While what? We know the counter is going to keep increasing. So it's going to start small, get big, and it's going to run all the way up to and include which one of these other two variables, value or total. I'm going to do value, right? So Sine, what's the condition look like then? Counter is less than or equal to value, okay? These get easier to write with time, okay? As you start thinking more about how you're approaching a value or whatever it may be, you'll start to figure out what goes where. Now the actual interior of the loop, okay? Who can help me with these lines of code? Matt, any ideas here that I can utilize? I need the total to keep getting bigger by a factor of counter, and I need the counter to increase by 1. So Matt, what would I write here to make that happen? Well, think about what I'm saying, okay? I need the total to increase by a factor of counter. So I need total to increase by a factor of. What symbol would I use for that bit of vocabulary? It's almost a plus equals, right? Because it's increased by, but it's by a factor of. So star multiplication equals, okay? Anytime we start talking about multiplication and increasing by, it's star equals, okay? So increase by a factor of, and I want to increase by a factor of counter, okay? And then Matt, one more time. I want to increase counter by 1. What's that code going to look like? Increase by, what symbol does that go for? Plus equal. So I want to increase counter by 1. So counter increased by 1. Do me a favor, write these comments out, okay? The more you write the words increase by, decrease by, whatever it is, and you start seeing the symbols, you'll start to remember it, okay? It's not just me telling it to you, it's you typing it, okay? Now that I have all that, I can print out my information, okay? We'll come up with our print statement. We'll say the factorial of, and then I'll put in value is, and then I'll write total. And that should tell us our factorial. We're going to run it. I'm going to type in 6 because I know the factorial of 6 is 720, and that proves that it's working appropriately. You can type in just about any value you want, and it will factorial it for you. However, if you type in too big of a value, it will probably give you a wrong response because it'll run out of digits to work with. Okay? And if you want to know more about that, take AP Computer Science Principles. Right, gentlemen? So there you go. Feeling better about this? Getting there? Aaron, question? The counter is the value that we're kind of keeping track of through the whole process. So the counter keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger by an increment of 1 until it reaches the value. Once counter gets bigger than this, and this is no longer a true statement, we don't do any more of this. Okay? So this is keeping track of how many times we go through the loop. You're going to have to be a little louder. What? So it goes up. The way that we wrote it, it goes up to and includes the value. Okay? We can write it in all sorts of different ways. Maybe it goes up to but doesn't include. We can simply write less than. Okay? But the way that we have it written to achieve the result that we're looking for, we want to include the value because 6 factorial has a factor of 6 in it. So we're going to multiply it by 6. So we want to go up to and use it. It all depends on your problem. Okay? I'm giving you tools. That's it. Okay? And I'm teaching you how to use the tools, but then you have to apply them to the specific problem we have. And there are all sorts of different styles of problems that we can work with as we go through this. Okay? For instance, tomorrow we'll get into how to calculate averages of test scores. We'll do a guessing game. Your first lab is going to be a guessing game. So being able to guess a random number from 1 to 100, telling me if it's too high or too low, hot or cold, so on and so forth. We'll put together games like rock, paper, scissors, and the tortoise and the hare, okay? And they all utilize these types of conditionals where we're trying to judge something as true or false, okay? It's just that this keeps going while this condition is true. Once it becomes false, we stop doing this and we move on. Notice the indentation. All this stuff that's indented happens over and over and over again. Once I stop indenting, it happens once, right? That's the important part. Getting there? Just make sure you watch the rest of this video at home and turn in what we finish, okay? Any other questions? Let's jump in and try that last problem, okay? Problem 4. Write a loop, okay? Not a loop, okay? Write a loop that will display triangles of stars where the number of stars is equal to the row they are in, okay? So if I type in 5 rows, I want it to print 5 rows of stars. The 5th row has 5 stars in it. If I typed in 6, the 6th row would have 6 stars in it, and the 5th row would still have 5, and so on and so forth. Actually an easier problem than you think if you remember one small detail about strings and how they can be multiplied by integers. So let's jump into this. Let's create one more problem. We'll call it while loops problem 4. Practice 4. All right. So based on the problem description, we have to be able to type in how many rows we want, right? So that's coming in via input. So I think we should get that first, right? We'll call it something like max rows. It's a fair variable name, right? That's how many rows we're going to display, the maximum number of rows. But we still need a control variable to keep track of which row we are currently in and printing, right? We're going to start at row 1 and print 1 star. Then we're going to move to row 2 and print 2 stars. Then we're going to move to row 3 and print 3 stars. And we're going to keep going through that process until we reach the maximum number of rows that we set to reach. Y'all with me on that? So I'm going to make a control variable, and I'm not going to call it counter this time. I'm going to call it row. I'm going to set it equal to 1. My control variable storing the current row to display. Now let's get into it. While what is true? We don't have a whole lot to work with here. We've got 2 variables, right? So what do we want to put here? While what is true? We know that this is going to be a constant that we're going to type in. It's going to be a number like 6, 8, 10, 12, 15. I don't care. We know that this is going to change based upon what row we're currently printing, right? It's going to go from 1 to 2, from 2 to 3, from 3 to 4, from 4 to 5, and so on and so forth. So what would I write here to make sure that this continues to do whatever it's supposed to do based upon these 2 pieces of information? All right, we've been through this 3 times now. What's that condition going to look like? Eric? Is there a word called value anywhere in this program? You can't use that word. Okay, so try it again, but use only the words that we have. While what? While row is less than or equal to max rows. Okay, you can only use the variables that you have at hand. One program does not translate into the next. We don't have anything called value here, so we can't use that. Okay. While my current row is less than or equal to the max row that I want to go into, yes? What I want to do is print the same number of stars that I have in that current row. So if I'm in row 1, I want to print 1 star. If I'm in row 2, I want to print 2 stars. If I'm in row 3, I want to print 3 stars, and so on and so forth. This can be done a couple different ways. The easiest way is to remember that little trick that I showed you back in the first unit, that you can take a string and multiply it by an integer, and it will print that string over and over and over again, right? So what if I do this, and I say print, okay, and I want to print a star times what number? I want it to print once if I'm in row 1. I want it to print twice if I'm in row 2. I want it to print 3 times if I'm in row 3, and so on and so forth. So what am I going to multiply this by to make sure that it prints that many times? Joe? Times row. Good. Row is keeping track of the current row we're in. It's set to 1 to begin with, right? So initially it's going to be star times 1. And then if you think about it down the row is going to increase by 1, isn't it? It's going to go to 2. And then in the next row, it's going to do star times 2. Then row's going to go to 3. It's going to do star times 3. Then it's going to go to 4, star times 4, 5, star times 5, so on and so forth. Using these variables can be a very helpful technique to allow you to get the information you want, just like we did in the previous problems. We kept increasing total by counter or increasing total by a factor of counter. Okay? Doesn't matter how we do it, we just got to get the math that works for us. Okay? That's it. Nothing else to do. Run it. Type in any number of rows you want. 17. Boom. There's a triangle with 17 rows and 17 stars in the last row. Okay? You want something smaller so that you can make sure that it's working? Go ahead and type in 4. 4 rows, 4 stars in the last row, 3 in the third, 2 in the second, and 1 in the first. So everything seems to be working exactly the way that we want. They don't have to be overly complicated. You just have to make sure that you're using the tools that you have effectively. Yes, ma'am.
I think I did like that because I have 1, 2, 4, and 8.
Did you do a plus equals 2 here instead of a plus equals 1? We'll take a look. Good? Any other questions? All right, here's what I need you all to do. We're not going to have a ton of time to do any more graphics today. That took a little longer than I expected, but that's fine. I appreciate all of the help you gave me, okay? What I want every one of you to do, though, is to go into Google Classroom and upload all 4 of these programs that we just completed. And if you would like to, for extra credit on this assignment, I'll give up to 5 points EC, finish the challenge problem. Try that. The challenge problem allows you to type in a number and it sums the digits of that number. To do that effectively, you will have to divide that number by 10 to figure out what the digit is, and then mod it by 10 so that you can remove it. And keep doing that over and over again until there's nothing left of the number you typed in. You can figure out the logic for that, upload that as well. Sound good? Go for it. Give me those file uploads and make sure you click turn in. If you're looking to do the extra credit, you can always unsubmit and resubmit. And you can do that at any time, right? But please turn it in. So PyCharm, the easiest thing to do is just simply grab all 4 ones. If you're in PyCharm, it's really simple. If you hold Shift and click on those files, you can select multiple files. Or hold Control and click on those files. You can select multiple files. And all you do is drag and drop them over in Google Classroom. Okay? Real simple to work with. Need help uploading anything? Let me help you. Drag that over. Be sure to turn it in.